Okay, good morning, participants, everyone. Good morning from
Bonjour, chers participants.
From Wakren for the LIBSENSE-RUFORUM webinar.
Bonjour et soyez tous les bienvenus à ce webinaire de LIBSENSE.
So you've got the slides on. You got the slide on that you can hopefully see that describes what we're about to do
Nous avons
today.
cette diapositive déjà sur l'écran que vous pouvez voir qui souligne les objectifs de ce webinaire.
So this webinar is a follow-on to some activity.
Aujourd'hui, ce que nous allons discuter constitue le suivi de
activités that we've had with RUFORUM in the last couple of years. The project is towards establishing a research data management platform for the RUFORUM community. As part of this work, we had run a pilot study, on the needs assessment for this data repository. Now, from that pilot, which we sort of evaluated the results in the last RUFORUM AGM in Harare, the participants in that meeting were very clear about the need to provide an overview of open science and research data management to enable them respond more adequately to these needs assessment. So that's why we're having this with this webinar. I had planned to actually describe a little bit of what we're doing in NRENS and Africa Connect, but I don't think there's any need for that. We should be able to maintain this conversation and pick up those threads as we go. So without wasting any more time, I think we will start. What I need to confirm now is that Nada is actually here. Now, if she's not, because Nada Musa from RUFORUM should be moderating this session. But this is the agenda for the day. So I am having those introductory remarks. That will be followed by presentations from 3 speakers to set the stage for the interactive sessions that we're going to have following that session. Ms. Musa would introduce them if she's on. If she's not, I will have to do that. But that session will be followed by a panel discussion, and our discussants are listed there from different parts of the spectrum for agriculture. So we've got a librarian, we've got a knowledge management specialist from a national agricultural organization, we got an editor for agricultural journal, and then we've got a manager, one of the speakers who manages research data services at a university, sharing their experiences. So at the end of that session, which we hope it will be very interactive with questions from the audience, we would close the webinar and launch the survey. So this survey now has been sort of updated with the feedback we got from the AGM in RUFORUM in Harare, and other comments from different stakeholders. So it's ready to be launched. It will be available in English and French. So we have as much coverage of the RUFORUM community as we can manage now. So without further ado, if Nada is here, oh yes, before I move on, some housekeeping. Now, during the presentations itself, we will take questions in the questions and answer feature. If you look on the bottom bar, you would see Q&A. Please, any questions you have, you should put them in there. I see somebody has actually started. Yes, it's been recorded, and the recording will be available. You can also use the chat feature to make comments, but we'd rather have your questions in the Q&A box so that we can actually the moderators have one place to go to them. Now, for interpretation, you will see a globe in the same bottom panel that says interpretation, and if you click it, there will be a choice of 2 languages. English, or French. Choose the one you want to listen to. So if you want to listen in French, just select French and keep it at French. And the same for English. In this webinar, all the presentations are going to be in English, but they'll all be translated to French. So you can use the original language as well. Then when it is time to actually ask questions and you want to speak, you can also use the raise hand feature to actually indicate that you want to speak, and then we'll let you have, we'll free up your mic so you can unmute yourself and ask the question or intervene as you want. So if Nada is here, I would like Nada to take this next session on. But if not, I will have to proceed. Do you know if Nada's in the room? I'm trying to look through the list.
I don't see her in the panelists.
I think Nada is not there. I think she seemed to be occupied. She accompanied the team that went to Sudan, so yes, she might be busy. So you could just go ahead to moderate this session. Thank you.
All right, very, very well. So I will do that. I can see some people introducing themselves in the Q&A feature. Please don't do that. Keep those kind of commentary in the chat and leave the Q&A for the actual questions for the panelists. Thank you. So, right, so the first session, Pam, can you move the slide so I can introduce the speakers a little bit? So this is our speakers for the day. The first three on top will be actually presenting what we would use to set the stage. Then they will join the other speakers, the other panelists, and then we can have this interactive session with the entire webinar, so with the participants and everybody. So if we will start with the first presentation will be from Daniel Albertsen. Daniel is a librarian from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. His talk is about why we need open science in agriculture. He has worked with open science since the first read and publish agreements were conceived in Sweden in 2016. For the last 4 years, he has worked part-time at the National Library of Sweden, mapping costs of open access publishing and metadata for all journals included in the transformative agreements. I'm sure he will talk a little bit about that in his talk, but he's also been quite involved in acquisitioning and evaluating subscriptions. I am not sure what the counter executive committee is, but I'm sure he will tell us. So Daniel, if you don't mind, I think this is the time you share your screen and start your presentation. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for inviting SLU and me here. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully you can see it very soon.
Yes, it is visible. Thanks.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to talk a bit about why open science matters for agriculture and kind of as almost set the stage for this webinar. And we're going to start at the absolute top, which is what open science actually is. So when we talk about this in Sweden, the last couple of years, there's always been a focus on open publications. So open access to journal articles and so on. But it's good to remind ourselves that it's also about open methodology, open source, like codes and sharing of algorithms, and also open peer review, and open educational resources, which I'm not actually sure how much you worked with, but it is something that's been growing in Sweden at least. So it's kind of in the spotlight at the moment. And then of course, open data, which would be the big thing for this webinar. And then recently in like the last couple of maybe 5 or 6 years, the calls for open science has really accelerated. So we have seen a huge increase in different stakeholders asking for science to be opened up to the public and to everyone that wants it. So for instance, we have UNESCO on a global level that really tries to push for open science because they see it as a solution for the sustainable development goals, for instance, because if we don't share science with each other, then we're not going to solve the problems we are facing as a planet. And then, of course, from my perspective, the regional perspective from European Union, we have the big initiative that came in 2018, that was Plan S, that tries to transform the whole publishing landscape into an open science landscape. And then, of course, there are a lot of national calls and goals for open science. In Sweden, we have our government said back in 2016 that they wanted all the publicly funded research to be open by the end of 2021. And all the major funders in Sweden are kind of, they haven't all signed Plan S, but they want to see a move to open science as well. And everyone demands all publications to be open access when they are published, if they're supposed to get funds from them. And then we, of course, have organizational policy documents that kind of takes all these different calls down to our own level. So how do we work with them in our own universities? And then so the question is, why does open science matter, and why does it matter for agriculture? Basically, the answer is the same to both. So what goes for open science goes for open science in agriculture. But I'm going to touch a bit more about agriculture specifically at the end of my talk. But I think it's good to keep in mind that it's about efficiency. So increased access to publications and journals can reduce the duplication of research and the cost of creating and reusing data. It also allows others to build and expand on prior work without repeating the same information. This is, of course, true, even for subscription-based or behind paywall articles, but in this way, everyone can access them. So there's no barrier for entry. And then we have quality. So due to wider evaluation, open science makes research more reproducible, allowing for more replications and validations of data. And this helps to alleviate the issue of manipulation of data. And the third one is innovation, which is something that Sweden as a country is like really pushing for. They really want open science to provide individuals with increased access to research, which in turn leads to more innovation of new products and ideas. And I think it's supposed to be individuals here is more like companies. So what Sweden wants with open science, the open science push, is to have companies use results from the publicly funded research to actually make something out of it. And then, of course, we have collaboration and societal benefits. So the increased access to research and publications allow for an increase in national and global collaboration. This speeds up the transfer of knowledge and assists in addressing issues that require a wider range of attention and collaboration. So this is like the basic idea behind why open science matters. But since you have me on the call and Sweden has been working a lot with transformative agreements, I thought I'd just mention this a bit. This is not all much about data, but I think this was the start for the really big movement towards open science. And now, so like this was like the last focus we had. Now we're focusing on open data. But so we were very early out with our agreement with Springer, which was a so-called read and publish agreement. So we still paid for subscriptions, but also for all the publications with Swedish corresponding authors were published open access. It was like a part of the cost we paid. In like now, what is it, 8 years, but 6 years ago, this agreement was actually kind of a failure. It was actually more expensive than if we simply just paid the list prices for open access. But this was a politically motivated agreement. So the government of Sweden wanted everything to be open access by 2021. So the National Library got a mission to simply make this possible. And we decided that read and publish agreements was the way to go. So we kind of make the process automatically for the researchers. The researchers shouldn't be able to think about if it's open access or not. Their articles should simply just turn out to be open access when they publish. And this led to, we actually canceled our agreement with Elsevier in July of 2018. And it actually we got the agreement back in January of 2020, which kind of shook the structure a bit. We actually got a really good agreement from Elsevier, if you can have a good agreement with Elsevier in any way. But it was actually kind of cheaper than it was before, even if we included publications in it. But then in 2018, Plan S came. And Plan S aim was for immediate open access. And they wanted, so they kind of allow publications in repositories and green open access, but they were really pushing for the gold route, where you pay an APC charge to have your articles published in either an open access journal or in a hybrid journal, which is a mix of subscriptions and open access articles. So it was, and Sweden followed this. So we kind of abandoned the green route. And then all of a sudden, we went from these read and publish agreements to something that was supposed to do much more than just publish our own research open access. So the idea was to transform the whole publishing landscape before the end of 2024. So the idea was, if enough countries joined in on the transformative agreements, then there would be so many open access articles in hybrid journals that they would simply flip to be open access only journals. And at the moment, we have over 20 such agreements with all of the major publishers. So the question is, how are we doing? We have failed to reach our goal of 100% open access by 2021, but we are up at 75%. So it's kind of clear what these agreements have done. So at my own university, we went from 30% in 2015 to 74 in 2021. A bit short of the 100% goal, but for us, all articles with SLU as corresponding author are actually more or less open access now. So in this way, it was a success. But then I took the liberty to check, I just did a quick check in Web of Science to see how this looks for sub-Saharan African universities. And the curves are a bit lower, but it's a clear path towards open access even here without these transformative agreements. Because the thing is that when we pushed for the transformative agreements, we did it with all the money we have or had. So we are actually, at the moment, we are the country with most articles published within transformative agreements, together with some other Nordic countries, Netherlands and United Kingdoms, Australia, Ireland, and Austria, and so on. But all these countries, except for United Kingdoms, perhaps, are not very huge publishing countries. So if you look at the bottom of this list, you have China and United States, for instance, which really makes up a huge part of the publishing landscape. And this, of course, means that we haven't transformed anything because the only ones that actually did this was a handful of rich countries that simply had the ability to just pump money into the system. So the challenges we face now is that this transformation that was supposed to happen by the end of next year is not going to happen at all. We have seen little to none in way of transformation, in way of flipping hybrid journals to open access journals. How am I doing for time? Sorry.
So you're doing fine.
Oh, good. And the only thing, so the challenges now is that the cost for this are huge. So we, at my own university, our cost increases have been about 60 to 70% in just a couple of years, which is enormous. And it was kind of expensive from the start. And then we also have that the only thing that's included in these agreements are journal articles, but our researchers publishes books, book chapters. We have all the proceedings, reports, all the gray literature. So this is just focusing on a albeit big part of the publication output of a university. It is far from everything. So we have departments that are more on the humanities side that really can take advantage of the transformative agreements. And then we're also completely locked into the legacy publishers, these big publishers, Elsevier, Springer Nature, Taylor & Francis, Wiley. And since we have pushed so much for this gold route, where we simply pay for open access, much support for green open access and other stuff has simply fallen away because this has been our main focus. And I personally think that this is a huge problem. We have kind of like, as I said, locked in ourselves in this because now the researchers are used to this. They don't want to do something else. For it works perfectly because it's super simple for them. They don't really have to do anything. And then we have an ethical dilemma as well. My university does a lot of research collaboration with Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. And we have seen a movement of corresponding authors to our own university, since the sole criteria for being included in a transformative agreement is to be the corresponding author of an institution that is part of the agreement. So now we see that some research groups are moving the corresponding authorship to ourselves simply to cover the cost for open access because there's nothing else we can do to do that. And they save between, I don't know, 2,000 to 5,000 euros, or even 10,000 euros if we're talking about Nature publications. And this we see as a huge ethical problem that we are discussing now within the university. Is there other ways we can support open access so this doesn't happen? Because to me, it seems like some kind of academic imperialism. But to move on to something perhaps more positive, the next step for open science for us, and I guess for the world, is open data. And in Sweden, we have a bit of a head start because we have archival laws that says that all publicly made research data has to be archived. And we also have something that's called the principle of publicity, which is if a citizen asks a government agency, which all universities are, for data, we have to give it to them. So there is no way for us to lock in data. And there's of course confidentiality. We don't leave out the personal data and so on. But by and large, we are supposed to provide data for the rest of our society. It's not the same for publications, unfortunately. And now we have Europe and our own national goals says that we should have like basically all research data provided should be open by 2026. And we also see that funders are demanding research data management plans to make this happen. And then, of course, when we talk about agriculture specifically, we have a lot of problem with commercial interest because a lot of the agricultural research we do is together with companies and they don't want to share their data. So they find various kind of loopholes to keep the data closed and within the company. This is just a short view of how data has, open data sets has grown in Sweden. So there is a Swedish National Data Service that kind of archives and makes data available. And you can see the huge rise there after 2010. This is where we got the mission to actually work more with data. And at my own university, and I hope this will be interesting for you, we have actually collected different kind of environmental, water, and agriculture data for, I think, at least 50 years. And it's always been open. So we have open databases where you can look. I'm sorry that all this is in Sweden, is Swedish, but what you see here on the left, on the right, is all the plots in our country where you can access data about soil composition. So you can see how much aluminum is in the soil, how much iron. And we also have the same for pesticides, which is the diagram below. So we can see, you can gather for almost all of Sweden, you can see where we have grown what and how much pesticides was used and so on, which really makes it easier for companies to actually expand their agricultural efforts. So we have like over a million samples and 16 million data points open here, only about this kind of stuff. And then I thought I'd just finish in some kind of, why does actually open science matter for agriculture? So something we work a lot with is the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think this is the part where I took Zero Hunger as an example, because it's one of the, I think it's one of the SDGs that are mostly connected to agriculture. And this is where it's actually kind of immediate. We do have pressing concerns, and we have problems with feeding the whole planet. And this is why open science really matters here, because if we can't share everything easily between us, then it's going to be harder to actually achieve these goals. And that's actually all I had to say.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. That was a very nice introduction to the topic. I think what we will do now is quickly have the second presentation. I don't know, Pam, can you put a slide up so that I can just introduce Samuel properly? I think it was Samuel. Thank you. So Samuel Simango is a manager for research data services in Stellenbosch. His topic is from research data management to open access research data. So basically, starting from where Daniel stopped and delving deeper into that. So that's what he's, like I mentioned, he runs that's his role in the university. He has been involved in the conceptualization and implementation of all RDM initiatives in that university. And we originally met Samuel during the COVID, when he joined us for a webinar. So he's been very involved in establishing RDM services in Stellenbosch. So that experience we're looking for him to share in his next presentation. So Samuel, please, if you can, just get started.
Thank you very much, Omo. I'm going to share my screen now. Can I just have confirmation if you can see the presentation on my screen?
Not yet.
Let's do that again. I think it should be visible now.
It is. You just need to move into slide mode.
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, so as Omo mentioned, my name is Samuel Simango. I'm the manager of resource data services at Stellenbosch University. I hope that all your attendees are fine, by the way. And this presentation is actually just going to discuss how we get from resource data management to open resource data. And I've used open resource data as a term just to draw a distinction between general open government data, which can be distinguished from resource data. So in terms of the outline, what I'll do is I'll provide a bit of a distinction, I'll draw a distinction between open access and resource data management. Then I'll provide a brief overview of resource data management. I'll discuss open access resource data before finally concluding. So first things first, what's the difference between open access and resource data management? I think this is quite important to consider. So let's look at the open access definition from the Berlin Declaration. There's a definition of what amounts to an open access contribution. It's a very lengthy definition, so I prefer to actually make use of a visual representation of what's embodied in this definition. So essentially, if you had to distill it to its core principles, open access publication advocates for making scholarly output accessible to anyone so that they don't actually have to pay any APCs, and the only barrier should actually be access to the internet. Now, there are different types of open access, such as the green, gold, there's diamond, etc. But at its core principle, the idea is to make scholarly output accessible openly. Now, if you look at a taxonomy of open science, what you see is that open access is actually a part of that definition, or at least falls under open science. And henceforth, you get the different types of open access. But if you take a close look at this taxonomy, you will not see anything about resource data management. And the main reason is that RDM would actually have its own separate taxonomy that will be divorced from open science, so to speak. So if we move on to the next slide, then what you'll see is that this is the taxonomy of resource data management. And it encompasses several aspects such as data management plans, policies related to resource data management, different types of services that support resource data management, different standards, as well as resource data management tools. Now, what I want you to gather from this is that open access and open data, to be honest, do actually fall under open science. And there are overlaps between resource data management and openness, particularly when resource data have actually been made open accessible. But in terms of the key takeaway, what I want you to know is that resource data management is not the same exact thing as open access. This will become a bit more clearer later on. So let's cover a brief overview of resource data management. The first thing that we need to consider is, what are resource data to begin with? Well, resource data can be described as any data collected or generated for the purpose of analysis in order to generate or validate scientific claims. If you look at the image on the screen now, you can see the different forms that research data can actually take. When they manifest in reality, what you find that they take the form of spreadsheets, documents, text documents, videos, audio files, etc. Generally speaking, research data management is conceptualized, or at least visualized, in the form of research data life cycles, such as the ones that you see on the screen. For the purposes of this presentation, though, I'll continue by using a more simple one, at least the one that we've adopted at my parent institution, Stellenbosch University. So in terms of conceptualizing research data management, what you'd have to take into account are two things. Firstly, the research data lifecycle, and on the other hand, the data lifecycle. So if you look at the research lifecycle, you see that researchers are generally concerned with conducting research with the purpose of actually generating some form of scholarly output. For example, a journal article. Whereas if you look at the data lifecycle, on the other hand, you see that it focuses primarily on the research data themselves, and it's not really concerned on the final output, such as a journal article. Now, there are some overlaps between these two life cycles. For instance, both of them do have stages relating to data collection as well as data analysis. But this is primarily because at each point in these different life cycles, researchers do actually get involved with dealing with research data. But once the research project has actually been concluded, they sort of bifurcate, so that in the research life cycle, the researcher is actually concerned with the research output, whereas in the research data lifecycle, a researcher is concerned with the management and treatment of the research data after the project has come to an end. So essentially, you can view these as two sides of the same coin, one side having the research lifecycle, and then the other side having the research data lifecycle. Now, going forward in terms of the conceptualization, another thing that needs to be taken into account is data management planning, because a lot of funders now have mandates that require researchers to describe the manner in which they will describe their research, the manner in which they'll treat their research data during and after the research process. So these are known as data management plans. So what we did at Stellenbosch University is we added this to the 5-step research data lifecycle, and we wound up with a 6-step research data management lifecycle that is far more comprehensive. And it has these 6 steps, as you can see. Now, this allows us to derive a working definition from the lifecycle itself. So in this sense, research data management can be defined as a process which entails 2 things. Firstly, planning for the manner in which research data will be managed during and after a research project. That's a data management planning phase. And secondly, controlling for all of those other factors. That is the collection, processing, analysis, sharing, dissemination, curation, and reuse of research data. Now, it's important that researchers remain cognizant of the goals of research data management. So there are 3 goals of research data management. Firstly, to assure that data are capable of supporting the analysis that's within the actual same research project. Secondly, to assure all operations performed on data are traceable so that researchers can actually go back and check if they've made any mistakes. This is particularly useful if someone wants to actually use research data and validate previous research data. And then thirdly, to facilitate the use of data by people other than those involved in their original collection, management, and analysis. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to point out that it is this 3rd goal that is really the one that is associated with open access, and not necessarily all 3 of these goals. Now, because as you can see from the first 2 goals, research data management is concerned with assuring something. This means that there's some kind of quality assurance that's associated with research data management. And wherever quality assurance needs to be addressed, that means that quality controls must also be put in place. Now, the reason that I state that, or at least why I make reference to quality, is because quality in this sense can be defined as an attribute of property, characteristic of an object, and the object in this case would be the research data. So one would actually apply research data management to sort of control the quality of the research data. If, for example, if you have a look at this ISO that relates to data quality, you'll see that data has various attributes of quality, such as completeness, precision, data needs to be accurate, data need to be current, consistent, understandable, etc. But all of these sort of like tie into the quality related dimension of data. Now, I should point out that this ISO is not particularly or specifically related to research data, but you can sort of like extract that concept and apply to research data, or at least extract that way of thinking and apply it by way of analogy, so to speak. Now, there is another thing that people should keep in mind when looking at research data management, and that's the concept, or at least the principles known as the FAIR data principles, which to a certain degree also speak to the quality of research data. So the FAIR data principles actually relate to the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse of research data. If one wanted to unpack these very briefly, what you find is that the findability really relates to the use of persistent identifiers, making sure that research data have rich metadata, and that the metadata are indexed in data repositories, and that the personal identifier should actually be included in the metadata. In terms of the accessibility, one should ensure that standard communications protocols are used and that these should be free. Essentially, authentication should only be used where necessary, but other than that, someone should be able to go online, conduct a search, and actually find the research data without necessarily having to pay for them. So in that sense, the research data should be openly accessible. And where the data cannot be made open accessible, the metadata should at least be available. If you look at the interoperability, this actually relates to the use of vocabularies, usually controlled vocabularies that are actually fair. So the idea is to make use of descriptions of the research data that are at least standardized particularly at the domain level, so that this can actually facilitate the creation of linked metadata. And then when you look at reusability, the various aspects, but the core one that stands out has to do with the uses licenses. So you can use licenses such as the Creative Commons attribution licenses that only require someone to acknowledge the original data creator before they can actually, or at least so that they can actually use the resource data. But the way I view it, to a large degree, you also want to make sure that the data are of a certain quality, because you can tick all these boxes, but if the data are actually still poor quality data, then they really cannot be reused in the future. So you want to make sure that others can actually comprehend the research data in question so that they too can actually make use of the data. Now, it's important to note at this point that you can have research data that are FAIR compliant, that is, that comply with the FAIR data principles and are also open, as well as research data that are FAIR compliant, but are closed. So what you want as an end goal is to be in the top right-hand corner here where you have open and fair data, but you might have to compromise and wind up in the bottom right-hand corner with closed and fair data. This could happen when research data are sensitive in nature and access to the data has to be restricted. So for instance, this could be due to intellectual property reasons, data privacy reasons, research contract issues. For instance, if there's a non-disclosure agreement that restricts the publication of research data. What you don't want is a situation where you wind up on the left-hand side here. Now, let's look at open access research data. Remember what I mentioned previously about the 3 goals of research data management? I pointed out that the 3rd goal is actually associated with the open access of research data. Now, the way that this would work out in practice is that a researcher would actually start off their project. They'll have the data management plan, collect their data, process and analyze the data, and then eventually they'll share or disseminate their research data in this case. And there are various ways through which this can actually be done. So in terms of the modern, or at least the previous publication model, when the focus was primarily on journal articles, researchers would actually publish the journal articles and that was it. But nowadays, what you find is that publishers require researchers to also provide their supplementary data. So what you find is that the journal article is published along with the supplementary data files. Secondly, you can find a case where researchers actually publish their data. So research data can be published in the form of a standalone data paper, which winds up in a data journal. And this is viewed as a publication in its own right, separate from a journal article. This data paper is more detailed than the supplementary data files that I referred to previously. Thirdly, research data can be deposited into research data repositories. These can be domain-specific repositories applying to a specific discipline, or they can be generic or multidisciplinary research data repositories. What you see here at the bottom, some Scholar data, is my institution's research data repository, which is essentially a multidisciplinary research data repository. So to conclude, what I want to point out is that there are 5 takeaways from this presentation. Firstly, research data management is not the same thing as open access. Research data management is a process which entails planning and controlling for the manner in which research data are treated during and after a research project. Research data management has a quality management aspect. Research data management actually serves a quality management function whilst also contributing to the openness of research data. And finally, research data can be made open and accessible in a variety of ways, which I actually just showcased 2 slides ago. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. So which African language is Danke?
That's actually Afrikaans.
Oh, okay.
Well, I wouldn't say it's an African language in that sense. Well, depends how you view it, right? But yeah, it's actually, yeah, that's actually Afrikaans. So it's not an indigenous African language in that sense.
Well, that's fine. Thank you very much. I know that was a very interesting presentation. So and I'm also looking forward to the interaction later because I can see some questions, or at least one question, which in my view was conflating RDM and open access. And I think your presentation kind of spoke to that, but we will discuss the question later on. So if we sort of just about keeping to time, so let's get on with the next presentation as soon as possible. And that's from Bosun Obileye. I would need those slides to be able to do justice to the introduction, but Bosun is from IITA, which is probably a very familiar organization to most of the Reforum community. So he's the institutional data manager, so we will get the perspective from a research agency that's different from a university, but he's got loads of experience in 20 years of postgraduate experience, with the last 6 years in the open science and RDM space. So he's got very, 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 good familiarity with all the concepts of identifiers, integrations, repository development. And then he's been working with different data groups and metadata groups. So I will just let him go on and get the presentation started. Bosun?
Thank you. Can I be allowed to share?
Please, you should have permissions to share.
Thank you. I'm Bosun, as has been introduced earlier, and my presentation will leverage on what the last two presenters have shared, more on what what Samuel presented, sorry. My topic is focusing on making your data count using an institutional data repository. And as has been introduced, I'm from IITA. We have presence across almost every country in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I try to define what an institutional repository is. And I call it a digital platform for collecting, preserving, and disseminating digital copies of the intellectual output of an institution, along with the associated metadata and persistent identifier. If you consider my diagram that I have, I say collect. Before you can collect any data, you must first plan. And that's where what Samuel was talking about, data management planning. There's actually a document that is called data management plan, which has its own documentations that you will need to first do with. Then the preservation comes in when you are through with your activities on the data. Now, I'm not talking about your paper publications. I'm talking about your data collections, your survey, your experiments. And that's what I'm looking at in this perspective. After preserving it, do you want to disseminate it, and in what format? So these are all going to be in digital format, not the paper. And it's residing in your institutional repository. You can call it a data warehouse that belongs to your organization, your institution. And you must include the specific metadata for this kind of data, where you include who is the author, who are the co-authors or contributors, their ORCID. You need to include when it was gathered, when the experiment started, when it stopped, what are the challenges, and if you have what is called column dictionary or a definition of your various headers, you must include them as part of the metadata. And it should have what is called a persistent identifier, a form of ID. DOI is so common. We also have undo that can identify your data in any part of the world at any point in time. It is another name for open access or open data repository. I mean the institutional repository. Data in open access repository should be FAIR compliant. Remember Samuel explained what you meant by FAIR with you. I'll also dig a bit more into it, because for institutional repository that is going to warehouse your data, some attributes are pertinent, they are important. So those digital copies of your data goes into this repository. So I try to look at the types of repositories that we have. I look at them from two perspectives. From the content that this repository warehouse, and then from the ownership type or structure. It is possible for you to have a repository where the content is just generic. What I mean by generic is that you have survey data there, you have experiment data, you have genomic data, that is data relating to genes. You have phenotypic data, data relating to physical features of maybe plants, animals, or creatures. It is not domain specific. And then we have those kind of repositories that are just subject specific, which is called thematic specific. Example is a gene bank. When you have a health data repository, they are specific repositories. They are not just open for anyone to put in any kind of data. Another way that you can look at repository that I mentioned is the ownership type or structure. Your institution could decide that we are going to maybe subscribe to all these cloud services, Google, Microsoft Azure, or whatever or AWS. Perhaps even on your campus, you decide to have your own repository. You may decide to subscribe to a public repository. For example, Zenodo is made available to the whole public. You don't really need to pay if your institution is registered. But if not, you need to pay a token. It's considered as being public, but at a subsidized subscription. And we have those that are really, really commercial, like Dryad. You have to pay. Even if you are an individual or what, there must be some commitment from your hand. So that is where you can view repositories ownership. Now, you may be considering what can we have in place within my institution or organization to have this repository. Normally, you need to have, it can be in the cloud, like I mentioned to you, cloud service providers like Microsoft Azure, Google, DigitalOcean, AWS, they're all out there. You can have it in your campus. and can be a combination of both the online and the on-premise. The diagram here shows you that I have like a database in my organization, and that database also has what is called the metadata schema. It is taking a particular metadata standard like Dublin Core, DD High, within CGI-AR, which IITA is a member of. We have what is called CG Core metadata standard. We're on version 2 now. So it could be that. So that is what give the attributes that to make your data to be findable. Your data is useless without metadata. Please know that at the back of your mind. And that is why the research data management is important. You ensure that you keep the history that goes along with your data. You ensure that it's properly documented when you are preserving your data. And you can see in my diagram that there is a particular tool called persistent identifier, the DOI, which must be minted to ensure that anytime somebody is taking my data, my identity, their digital identity, or the digital identity for the data follows that data anywhere it goes. That server must be installed with software that can handle data warehousing as a repository. So we have SICAN, we have Dataverse, we have Resolverse, and a host of other software outside there. For the database, most use Postgre. Postgre is considered to be one of the most secure databases in the world now. And some use MySQL. There are other kind of databases. I only just put those ones there. After you have set all this thing up, you can access them within your local organization, but it needs to have internet connectivity for it to become open access and open data. So the internet is important. In your local organization, it's always recommended that you have a copy of all your data moving somewhere else outside your environment. I can call it a cloud replica, so that if anything happens within the institution, you still have copies of your data. So the repository moves and warehouse data anywhere people access it. In the past, several research data conducted in the past cannot be found due to lack of preservation. I'm talking about what happened in the past. In the case of IITA, that's what happened. IITA has been existing since 1967, and we have lost fantastic research data. Scholars and researchers keep repeating the same trials. You see students doing their final year projects on a trial or an experiment that someone had conducted about 10 years in the same institution. We are keeping reinventing the wheels. We need to move outside that cycle. We couldn't scale up because there is no data to leverage on. And most of the time, African researchers' visibility is so low, except for South Africa. And the reason is that there is no evidential data when we write our papers. So most of the time, our papers do not have the international respect compared to somebody from the advanced economy that can point out the data relating to its new research output. Research data management best practices is not popular. Research data management by itself is another topic, but it involves the proper planning, collection of data, sharing, reuse, and then respecting what is called PII, personally identifiable information, legal concerns that may be addressed with data before you present it, and then sharing with licenses. I want to ask a question. This source is from University of Virginia, and Canada adopts this. Where does your data end after use? After you have finished your project, you've written your proposal, you started it, you collect the data, you did the analysis, you share your data with people that need it within your local institution, and they say, "You are finished with the project." Do you drop it in a data archive system, which allow it to be rediscovered? Or you ended it up on your computer, flash drive, or shared drive? If that is the case, that data, I can bet it one day is going to be lost. If it is not lost, it will not be reusable. Someone that stores his data in Stata keeps on having different versions. If you do not convert that data to a particular format that open, like CSV, TXT, that data in about 20 years will not be reusable again, because that software will not be available. So it is always good you consider your trusted repository, which you can look at the picture of how one is for your data. When we talk about making your data to be fair, Samuel explained that it means your data must be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In just a few minutes, let me give some little more insights into when it comes to data. Your DOI, the persistent identifier, is a must to make your data to be findable, because that is like the name of that data, the ID, the address where it belongs to. When you have a name, you have an address. So that DOI takes people to the house. Is the GPS to that data. And data must be described with rich metadata to make it to be findable, which must be clearly and explicitly included the data itself to describe it. It must be registered and indexed. Those are another explanation. Registering means that you assign, like we as an organization called DataCite, they normally create DOI. DOI means digital object identifier. You can subscribe to them, or you can use Handle to give your data a registered name or address. And then to be accessible, it means that that data, when somebody calls it, it can access it at any time, not that it's available in the morning, at night it's not there. It should be free. It should be able to open it at any point in time without it locking you out. The metadata should even exist when they cannot find the data. That is the worst case scenario. And for interoperability, I need to add one more thing to what Samuel said. Your data must be in open format. It must not be in Microsoft Word. It must not be in Microsoft Excel when you are storing it. If you want it to be able to be accessible and interoperable, it must be in open format, like CSV, JPEG. If your movie is MPEG, MP4, that is a common standard, you have to make it be like open format. That is mandatory. And for the reusability of your data, that's where we talk about your license, the attributions, the citations. Now we have data citation. I will show you on what we have at IITA data portal. What will institutional repository do for you? It's going to, sorry, my screens are blocked here. I can't see it, but I know what I wrote there. It's going to attract more funds for you because your data can be traced and donors will be sure that you are not playing around with their fund. It will increase the visibility of your researcher. I give example here. These are data from IITA repository. And you can see locations where data are being accessed from France, from the United States, from Brazil. The visibility is high. Those are countries accessing the data. And you can see the number of 8 users that are eating the data, trying to use what we have put in there. Before, nobody sees all this data. Now, because we have put it in an institutional repository, people all over the world, researchers, organizations, they are accessing our data. It enhances innovation and scaling because when we find out that this work is doing fine, then we want to improve more on it. We mitigate frauds. When you publish your data and it's assigned to your name, no other person can claim it. Before, the same data can be claimed by 100 people and writing different things on it. Now we know who is the owner with institutional repository. It also leads to disruptive, innovative startups. At IITA, we've seen a lot of young folks starting up organizations because of our data. Sometimes they come around and we try to explain what data is about. And before we know what is happening, they are starting something based on the data. It's going to increase the efficiency, especially with data management plan. At the end of the day, it's going to reduce your cost. What must you do? Your institution should have data management plan in place. And then understand basic of research data management as explained by Samuel. You need to develop your data management plan for all your projects and adopt FAIR principle. Samuel have explained FAIR principle to us. You must respect privacy. Legal and ethical consent must be fully respected. You should ensure that you have a persistent identifier. Use an open access repository for your data. I ask you this question, do you have your ORCID? If you don't have it, Google for ORCID. It's like your own ID where you can be identified. For instance, somebody can call me Bosun Obileye, another person will say Tubosun Obileye, another person say Ola Obileye. They are all the same person, but it will give you different output. So an ID that connects me to all these names is my ORCID. You need to have it. This is what we have at IITA. I don't have the time to go through the story of how we started it. And I was actually the one that started this at IITA. And we grew the repository to more than 3,000 data sets of different projects at IITA. Thank you.
Excellent timing, Bosun. I was just about to say, oh, Bosun, please round up. And you just did that on time. Thank you very much, all 3 of you, for very informative presentations. I think the stage is set. I can see some questions in the chat, but I think, at this point, I will hand this over to Dr. Pamela Abbott, who is moderating the next session, so she can just take it on from here. So Pam?
Hey, thank you, Omo. I'm going to share the screen back to our agenda just to remind people where we are right now in the webinar. So we've had the 3 speakers make their presentations. And of course, this is already creating quite a stir with a lot of questions coming in. Thank you very much for those questions. We're now going to move into the panel discussion. Our panel will be made up of the 3 speakers that we have heard so far. We have also invited 3 other guests. Of the 3 other guests, we've got 2 of them here. And what I'm going to do is introduce them, allow them to give a short 5-minute presentation of themselves, explain who they are, what their experience is with the topic of the webinar, so they can sort of give you an idea of what their perspective is. And then we'll open the floor for the general Q&A, which I'll be moderating. At that point, people can feel free to put questions in the Q&A or chat or sort of raise their hands so that we can address the Q&A and get the different respondents from the panel to answer your questions. So now my first panelist who I'm going to introduce is Ms. Victoria Mbigade, and she is a knowledge management specialist from the National Agricultural Research Organization, NARO of Uganda. She's a knowledge management officer, and she's been working in that position since 2014, holds a Bachelor of Arts in Development Studies from Mbara University of Science and Technology and a Master's of Science in Agricultural Information and Communication Management from Egerton University, Kenya. She's an Alliance for Science Fellow 2018 in Cornell University's College of Agricultural and Life Sciences, and a certified knowledge manager for sustainable development. Very passionate about knowledge management, science communication, effective service delivery, and rural transformation, and also a farmer. So I think, Victoria, you have got a lot to say to us. Did you have any slides, or are you just going to talk to the topic itself?
I'm going to just talk.
Okay, so I will leave this slide on the screen then, so that people can continue to read your profile while you speak. So you've got 5 minutes, Victoria, to give us your position. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Thank you so much for the invitation, for having me here to share my experience. Let me greet all our participants. Good afternoon from Uganda. Like Pamela said, I work with the National Agriculture Research Organization in Uganda as the knowledge management officer, and maybe to give an overview of what NARO does. NARO is a public research organization, and it is mandated to conduct agricultural research all over the country. The way NARO is structured is that we have 16 institutes. 9 of them are under national, they conduct national research of national importance, while the others conduct research of zonal, at zonal level, meaning that they conduct adaptive research in the respective agroecological zones where they are located. Just by our mandates, you can tell that we develop or NARO generates a lot of research in the process of conducting and executing the mandates. And what is happening at the moment is that while we estimate our data to be at around 257 terabytes, you cannot at the moment really access it easily. Why? Because there is a way it is kept on either individual gadgets. The previous speaker alluded to that, a similar experience at IITA. So we have a similar arrangement or a similar scenario. And this is either non-structured or paper-based, and it is very hard to access. Most of the times it is lost as staff leave, as and when. It is also underutilized. This also makes it very hard to make informed decisions, lots of duplication and time wasting, looking for the data and all that. The other component or characteristic of data management or research data management at NARO is that while conducting the research, it is done in collaboration. So we have lots of partnerships, we have lots of collaborations, and in most cases, you find either the donor, the research is also donor funded. The government of Uganda funds, yes, to a certain extent, but we also see a lot of donor funded research happening And in most cases, the donor tells you what they want, the terms and conditions, if I may say that, on how to handle the data. And until recently, that is in 2021, NARO developed a research data management policy. So before that, all the many years we have conducted research, the donors and funders had an upper hand as far as data is treated, ownership, storage, and all that. Then when it comes, say, to the infrastructure storage and all that, for example, if a project is coming in, it will, and they're interested in the data more than we are, or they treat data very, very prestigiously than we do. They'll either give us a storage facility, and the access rights will be shared, yes, between the implementing individuals and the funder. But then at the end of the project, all that data is moved, or your access is limited. So you end up losing quite a lot. Now, with the policy in place, we are getting staff on board and sharing the advantages of having our research data managed very well, as well elaborated by the previous speakers. The only challenge you would get is one will ask you, all researchers will always wonder what the motivation is, you know. Why should I give you all my data? The ownership issues come in. Like, they feel like if we give out all the data, we are losing ownership, complete ownership, and we have no access entirely moving forward. And maybe the other bit, if I'm to mention something on the open access component, NARO has an in-house journal. It's called the Uganda Journal of Agricultural Sciences, where we encourage, at a policy level, encourage scientists to publish with just at least one publication per year, or at least every project contributing to the journal, because it is open access. And we have a certain, a fair percentage responding to this, but they also associate open access to low visibility, to low impact factor. You know, there is a way they target high end impact factor, high end impact journal needing up to $100 or $300. They'll pay that money and have their work published there, regardless of who will what happens thereafter, because we've also seen cases where access to such work is limited after you've paid and published your work in there. But the other option we have at national level, we have the National Library of Uganda, where all public institutions are required to deposit copies of the publications we produce. And so since it is a publicly funded research, we comply to existing national policies. I think I can submit at that point Pamela, and maybe get more reactions and questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Victoria. So that's a very good introduction to your role in NARO, and speaking also to the topics that we have heard so far from other speakers. My next panelist is Dr. Joseline Chigwada, Chinonye University of Technology, Zimbabwe. Joseline, you are joining us again. You were at the AGM workshop that we held in Zimbabwe. You are a deputy librarian in your university and have held several such roles in different universities. You've got a Doctor of Literature and Philosophy in Information Science, Master's and Bachelor's Honors and degrees in Library and Information Science from National University of Science and Technology in Zimbabwe. Your research interests are around big data, open science, research data management, indigenous knowledge systems, information literacy, open access, marketing library products and services, digital libraries, and contemporary issues in library and information science, and also the changing role of librarians. So I think you would definitely be able to speak well to this topic. So Joseline, if you wouldn't mind, could you also give us a 5-minute introduction to yourself and your particular position on this topic, please? Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Pamela. Just a brief summary of my views and experiences in line with research data management as a librarian. In Zimbabwe, we have noted that this topic is mainly covered by librarians, especially academic librarians, who have been attending some training sessions and workshops in how to deal with research data management. And they've been working with other stakeholders to develop, especially a national open science policy, mainly looking at all the facets of open science so as to ensure that the country is in line with what is happening. And this has been done mainly by the Zimbabwe University Libraries Consortium, ZUG, which have got an open science work group, which composed of librarians from various academic libraries. We've been working together to do that. And in terms of the curriculum, I've noted that at the National University of Science and Technology, for example, which is the major library school, there is a course on research data management as a way of capacitating the students who are doing Masters of Library Information Science to know how they can assist researchers in managing data. And then at institutional level, it's the librarians again who are spearheading this to ensure that the institutions have got research data management policies so that they assist researchers, mainly who are now being forced by research funders to have a data management plan when they are applying for research grants. So this is mainly done by academic librarians. And from the main challenges that I've observed so far, most researchers, although they are now aware of the research data management processes and services, most of them, they're not willing to archive their research data, but they do so only when they are forced by the research funders when they are applying for grants, so during the research data management planning process, and then at the end of the project, so that they will archive their research data on a research data repository. So efforts to have research data repositories at various universities have been fruitless. Why? Because of that resistance from researchers to archive their research data. Most of them, they prefer to archive them in other data repositories that are well known already, instead of having our own research data repositories in our universities. But now, taking a leaf from other countries in Africa, taking, for example, in South Africa, they've got quite a number of research data repositories, and they are quite advanced in terms of research data management. Some researchers are now coming aboard, and then they are willing to archive their research data. So we want to have like a pilot to ensure that we have a base whereby we can say to other researchers, look, this is possible, some others are doing it. And then in terms of the opportunities, I've managed to find out that we can ride upon the need by research funders, whereby they are saying everyone who is applying for research grant should archive their research data. They should have a data management plan during the proposal writing stage. So now we can write on that, and then also ensure that we create awareness among the researchers and tell them that this is possible. As institutions, we can have our own data repositories. And also we can't run away from the issue of collaborating and working with other stakeholders that are already in this, taking, for example, working with the NRENs and other projects that are being done, taking, for example, Africa Connect 3, so that we create awareness and build capacity within the universities and other research institutions within the country to ensure that this is possible. And we can also work with other bodies such as the AAU to ensure that we create awareness at the executive level, so that if they support from the management, then it will be easier to have research data repositories within the institutions. That's my brief summary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Much appreciated. And now we will open the floor for questions. I wonder if all the panelists, if you could sort of just enable your videos so that everyone can see us all. That would be panelists and speakers. So Daniel and Samuel and Bosun, if you could please join us in the video with your videos on. Excellent. So there are some questions already that I have seen in the Q&A. The question from Liz Levy, I think, Omo, I think you and Francis can probably address that at the end of the session, because that speaks to the MOU between the RUFORUM and WACRN, which this falls under, what we're doing today falls under that. So I believe that that one can be answered by yourself, Omo, and Francis, perhaps at the end of our session. For the panel now, here's a question on research data management. Is there a research data management group or listserv that one can join as they consider institutionalizing research data management? So for anyone here who, on the panel, who has some sort of experience with that, is there anyone who can address that question? Is there a listserv or group that one can join when they consider institutionalizing research data management? Anyone on the panel?
To the best of my knowledge, there is none that I know specifically that address it, but we have in numbers of, bodies or organizations that treat all these topics as seminar series. For instance, RDA, if you're a member, you'll be opportunity to have access to all this kind of seminar and all the series that relate to research data management, especially agricultural data. There's another association is called iAssist. iAssist, I think it's International Association of Social Science, Information Services and Technology. They deal so much about research data, and if you're on their group list, you have so many resources that will guide you through. But precisely to have like a single association or body only dealing with research data management only, I've not heard of one.
Thank you, Bosun. So that's iAssist and RDA. It seems that the person who posed that question, you can probably try those institutions. Theo Dozier also is asking, what is the relationship, if any, between research data management and institutional repositories? But I do think, Bosun, you spoke definitely to that topic, and hopefully that would have responded to that question. So I'm going to put that, assume that that's been dealt with your talk. The next question from Never Mujeri. What is big data management as it pertains to research? Okay, so anyone wants to address that one? What is big data management as it pertains to research?
I can contribute to that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to first understand what is meant by big data. So when you are talking about big data, you are talking about data. It has 4 V's: large data volume, the volatility, the value of it. You are talking about data coming from different sources. So you are not referring to one single data. And you are bringing them together to use them for further tools. So in agriculture, what we can see is repositories will give you access to data, but it's not a platform to run what is called big data. So you will still need to build what is called like a data warehouse, where you're going to carry out what is called data mining in data marts, which is another language. For us at agriculture, for agricultural practices, repositories will give you access to data, which you can collect using API. APIs are application programmable interfaces, a tool that can allow you to scoop the data, and then you can further process it, but not that the warehouse itself is the data source. Yeah.
Okay.
Pamela, if I can just add to that.
Okay.
Firstly, I wanted to add that there's a mailing list that is run by JISC. It's known as Resource Data Man. That's the one mailing list that I'm aware of that focuses on resource data management. They send out emails at least on a monthly basis. For the big data management thing, I won't add too much what Bosun said because his answer was actually very clear and concise. What I can say is that at the end of the day, with resource data management, what we're dealing with really is long tail resource data. You can draw the distinction between your big data and, let's say, I won't call it small data, but for lack of a better term, in the sense that it is not continuously being collected like your big data. The capacity to host big data in these repositories that we speak of, these research data repositories, is just not ideal. The big data is called big data for a reason. It's just too large. And we are dealing with astronomical data, genetic sequencing data. I mean, one sequence can yield a terabyte or 2, and that could literally be 2% of your university's capacity just from one researcher. So this deals with smaller size research data sets, and even the genetic sequencing data, that's a large data set, but it's not big data. But I'm just trying to point out that we're not talking about that sort of thing. Now, from that big data, let's say there's a big data project, it may be possible to still write an article and derive at least a smaller size data set that could possibly wind up in a resource data repository, but you wouldn't be putting large size of data sets in the repository. That would be part of the, at least not in the repository, but it's still part of resource data management as part of the active data phase of the life cycle. So if you look at the data collection, data processing and analysis phases, but the data would probably be processed using other platforms. It could be high performance computing clusters, etc., but not necessarily the repositories. And generally, you would be dealing with data scientists as opposed to your data curators working with that. That's my 2 cents on it.
Okay, good. Shall we move on to the next question? Yes, okay. The next question is from Robert, and hold on, I lost my thunder. Right, good. So Robert says, and this question is for Samuel. Thank you for your presentation. Could you please kindly share with us a picture of what will cost a modest African university to set up an institutional data repository? More so in terms of the cost of the infrastructure, software, staffing, and expertise or training. For this one's for Samuel, if at all you can address that question.
Okay, I can give it a shot, Robert. I actually saw the question late early on. I thought about it a bit. So it's a difficult question to answer because of the factors that you have to take into consideration. So, and that should be apparent from my response. Firstly, it really depends on which model you're going to follow. Will you go for a self-hosted option? Or will it be a case where you go for a subscription model relying on software as a service? And these are things that we considered at Stellenbosch University before we ended up going for software as a service option with Figshare. But if we had the self-hosted option, for instance, we would have had to consider using what type of software we would use. That would be open source software, most likely. Could use DSpace, but that's more ideal maybe for your institution repositories. Although the third-party repository Dryad is based on a DSpace platform, but Dataverse is probably more commonly used when institutions actually have self-hosted options. If you go for that option, then you will also have to consider the staffing costs. You might actually need to have a systems administrator, someone who actually manages the software component of the platform. There'll be the infrastructure costs as well, particularly when it comes to storage. The data must be stored. And this really then depends on how much data or storage capacity you're willing to take on, because the cost is sort of like related to the capacity. If you only have 1 terabyte compared to someone who has 100 terabytes, the cost is higher. But if you were to use the software as a service option, then you would literally outsource some of these things. The infrastructure costs such as storage and software would be built into the subscription or at least licensing. And in this case, you could look at commercial providers such as Figshare. But even then, the answer is still a bit tricky because it depends on the profile of your university or institution. For instance, is it a research-intensive university? How extensively do the researchers publish research output? What is the size of the university? What's the researcher headcount? What about the student headcount? Is there a consortium of institutions that have banded together in order to help bring down the cost, the subscription costs? This is something that we did at, or at least we received funding from indirectly from the government. And there were 4 institutions that were part of a consortium, and we went with Figshare. But over time, it was possible that if we managed to get more than 10 member institutions in South Africa, the subscription costs would go down. And right now there are 17 members in South Africa. So the cost has gone down significantly to what it was when we originally started way back in 2017. But that's a long way of stating that there's so many factors to consider that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It would really depend on the circumstances of your particular institution. But you are free to contact me if you want me to elaborate a bit more on that, but it's very hard to just give you a definitive answer.
Thanks very much, Samuel. I wonder if anyone else from, okay, Omar, I see your hand is raised, because yes, this does speak to infrastructure, doesn't it? So yeah, if you wish to also respond. Yes,
it does, and I just wanted to chip in because I think Samuel just did justice to the requirements. So what I can say from the NREN point of view, I didn't discuss NRENs very much, but the whole idea of NRENs are to provide infrastructure for its communities. And then in LIBSENSE, we had looked at this at length to try and understand the best way to provide these institutional repositories at the most affordable rates. And then there is a model that we've adopted in LIBSENSE, which the Japanese do as well. So we're talking about community-driven platforms where the community itself, right, because they share the cost, like in the way that Samuel was discussing, they share the costs and the costs become affordable for every member. The difference here with the regional rents and the NRENs is that this infrastructure is not run by a commercial provider. It is community governed, and we are actually encouraging national infrastructures that that the NREN can provide for the customer, for his consumers or for his constituency. So that way, institutions don't have to, for a singular low cost, they don't have to worry about the storage, the expertise to manage these repositories, acquire the PEDs, and actually use them. So if you look on the LIBSENSE website, I put some of that there. In the national plans we have, we're working with policy and infrastructure. And the idea is to use meetings like this to raise awareness, complement the national open science roadmap policies we're developing, so that can actually, we can get a groundswell of users that makes the cost viable. I just thought I would throw that in. Pam, also there's some questions in French. So if you need any help there, I can sort of, I have put one in your chat, I think.
Yes, I've seen one in my chat, and that speaks to whether there will be something like this, a workshop like this that's dedicated to French-speaking or Francophone African countries on data repositories, development of data, management of policies, etc. So I think that goes back to you, unfortunately. It means whether we can get together a set of speakers such as what we have today, who are French speaking and who would be able to do a similar kind of webinar that's aimed at French speaking countries. I don't know.
We have plans with CAMES. So CAMES is a regional organization for education and research in Francophone speaking countries. So this has also come up with them, and we'll discuss with Cecile when we're in Accra next month, and see what we can do for our Francophone colleagues.
Okay. I've got a question here for Bosun. It says, you say that the person, Marzia Briel says, you say that the data identifiers will go wherever the data goes. If you look at OpenAI, like Alexa, which data mines information and presents it without sources or citation, then I am not sure that the data identifiers will be of any use or respected by AI. Data ownership may be respected by the ethical researcher. Do you agree? So that's for Bosun.
Yes, AI could be ubiquitous when not properly managed. Ethically, when you are mining data, when you are extracting data, what AI does is use the process that is called ETL. Extract, transform, load, and then a process. If you plug the API of the data repository into the warehouse of an AI platform that is now moving into a data mining system, it may not respect the identity of that data. Ethically, most repository will not appreciate that. Normally, what should have been done is that when you are processing that data or the outcome of your data, you specify the source where some of the data came from. For instance, there is a platform called Guardian that's pulled data from US government, Australian government, European Union, from Haiti, CGIAR. But when you land on that page of that platform, it says it's sources of the data that are being used. So I agree with you. AI will definitely disregard your identity if it is not respected by those that set it up. Ethically, it is wrong.
Thank you, Bosun. I've got a question here, Victoria. It was in French. I had Google translate it for me, so power of technology. Thank you to everyone who participated in this webinar. I would like to know what policy Madame Victoria Mbigade intends to pursue to try to open the data of her institution to research in the dynamics, of course, of the policy of open access and open science. Does she have a perspective on the matter? So what policy will you pursue to try to open data for your institution for research and for the course of research to take place? That's for Victoria.
Thank you very much. So what happens? What is going to happen for our case now that we have an an institutional policy on research data management. It is guiding us. We have different sections therein guiding us on the different areas along the data value chain, from the capturing to the storage, the collection, you know, all that. So since we do a lot of research in collaborations with a couple of partners, say on a particular project, depending on what that the other institutions' policies say, we can reach a middle point and agree on how we want to treat data and how open we want to go, as far as open or access to that data is concerned. Because as NARO, as an individual organization, we cannot dictate for the rest of the implementing partners, say on a particular project. So, but with our policy, we will guide on how we want to do that on the accessibility and the open access component, and then other implementing partners, depending on what their policies say, as far as accessibility and open access is concerned, then we can meet a common ground. Only in cases where NARO is the sole implementer of a project or of a research initiative, that's when NARO will just go full blast and dictate and say, this is how we are treating this data as far as its openness is concerned. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you. So Jocelyn and Daniel, neither of you have had a particular question posed to you, but I wonder if you can give us your viewpoints on any of the topics so far that have been raised by our audience.
I actually have something of a reflection and a question myself that came to me now, because when I looked at all the repositories we have in Sweden, there's a lot of metadata, and the services itself are actually in Swedish, which doesn't help the rest of the world very much. So is this, it's like the language barrier a problem for you too? Do you have a lot of data described in different languages? Because something we struggle with as a non-first language English-speaking country is that we do a lot of work in Swedish. It's just that we publish in English. Do you see something similar for you, especially considering English and French that we talked about here?
Daniel, there are quite a number of questions out there about just that. How do we access data in our language? It's French, we speak French, how are we going to, yeah. So there is something like this that is a dynamic that we're dealing with as well, it seems. So is there any special thing you do, like in Sweden? What? I
mean, we do try to, when we actually publish data, we want it to be with English language descriptions as well, so it can be reused. So it follows FAIR principles, because it isn't very reusable if no one can understand it. And I would say I wouldn't trust Google Translate when I would actually try to translate data descriptions, because it's usually very specific to the subject at hand. But for us, it is a challenge, because many people, so this archival law we have that everyone actually has to be able to provide their data if someone asks for it, is a problem, because many people only have it, I mean, their work libraries are in their respective languages, usually Swedish.
Yeah, issue. Jocelyn, anything you wanted to comment on any of the topics raised by our audience?
Okay, thank you, Pamela. Let me respond to what has been raised by Maina Waruru on the platform, whereby she was saying a data repository is always open access, or access depends on the owners. If we look at the issue of open science in general, and then looking at open data specific and open access, we are saying that this data that we are talking about should be accessible. So also looking at the FAIR principle now, we are saying that the research data that is being archived by researchers should be accessible and should be usable. So for it to be that, it means that the data should be open access and other researchers should be able to access it. So if we say that we have a data repository, but the data is not accessible, then we are not applying the open data principle. Why? Because some other people cannot be able to reuse that data if it is closed access. So here we are saying most of the data repositories that I know, they are open access to ensure that it applies to the FAIR principle so that other researchers are able to find it and reuse it, so that we talk about the reproducibility of research and also avoid the duplication of research, so that when I've done a certain research, if another researcher wants to do that, he or she would just utilize the data that is available and come to other conclusions as well. So most data repositories should be open by nature. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jocelyn. I do want to give Omo and Francis, as Dr. Francis Otto from RUFORUM, some time for them to wrap up our session, because Omo, you didn't get a chance really at the beginning to explain the MOU under which we're doing this with RUFORUM and anything to do with LIBSENSE itself. So it might be a good idea for us to end on that topic, and also to bring Francis in so that he can also give a wrap-up talk. So Omo, can I hand it back to you then? We've more or less exhausted our questions, and I think we need to come back to you. And basically, again, Liz Levy, she had posted that question about how this thing, what we're doing, is going to integrate with RUFORUM's existing repositories and across the universities that RUFORUM has under in its network. And she mentioned something related to AFLIA. So if you could perhaps start by addressing that and then bring Francis in and we can wrap up. Thank you.
Right, so we've got 7 minutes. I actually had some slides at the beginning, but I thought, maybe this, and I'm glad I didn't take up so much time, so we would have had less time. So yes, Pam has mentioned LIBSENSE. So I would like to believe that everybody here is familiar with LIBSENSE. If you're not, I have put in the link in the chat. It's libsense.ren.africa. I will also share what I will also do, because there won't be time to sort of present it. It was, I just sort of put a few slides together just to give you a sense of what LIBSENSE is and what we do. Let me just share that. Just give me a minute. So you can look at that, just a few slides. The idea was to discuss that. So let me copy that. Other than that, it is, yes, Pam, we have a project with RUFORUM. I think I did mention it briefly. The idea is to build this data repository. It would respond to some of the questions that have been asked, how would you set up an institutional one? We see RUFORUM, because of the network and the framework it already has, as the appropriate custodian of infrastructure like that in Africa. And as regional RENs in the Africa Connect project, for those who do not know, WACREN has sister networks, peer networks in South and East Africa and in North Africa. And together we run the, no, I'm not presenting, I'm just talking. We run the Africa Connect project. My slides are in the chat, that I would have presented. I just don't have the time for that now. So we run the Africa Connect project. The idea is to support RUFORUM and its community to develop this platform. We're starting now, but over the years, we'll build services on top of it. And the community is going to be part of that. So what we really want to do, because I have to run off by 11 myself, I want to give Francis Otto the last word. And then when he finishes, we'll be launching this survey. The survey is going to be in English and French. We want you to circulate it as widely as you can in your networks, so we get as many responses as possible. It will help us in implementing this platform for RUFORUM. Over to you, Francis. Is Francis there?
Yeah, I'm there. I was just trying to put up something really, really small here.
Go on.
Okay, it's good. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much to our very excellent presenters. I think you have given justice to this topic. Daniel started by making a definition of the key terms that we are using to let us understand what open science is about and the call generally that are coming up for the open science and why really this matters. And I think it was a very good thing that he did mention some of the challenges that we do have in going towards open science. And thank you so much for even advising on the next steps that we have to do towards adopting open science, and particularly with emphasis on open data. And then Samuel, thank you so much for giving us the perspectives from South Africa and letting us understand the difference between open science, open access and data management, and with a really great emphasis on how to manage data, research data. So in terms of research and data life cycle, you did really good justice there and giving us the 3 goals of data research, data management. Then the 2 of you talked about the fair data principle, which has become something very important. As much as we're talking about sharing of data, we have to take cognizance of things that make quality and usefulness of data through these 5 principles of, 4 principles of open data. So thank you very much, Ola Dawson and your colleagues. You did mention so many things about agricultural data in the way that really RUFORUM as an agricultural organization emphasizes so much on data which are specific to agriculture, and which something that Victoria also did mention, except for Victoria talking about having the unstructured data is really a big challenge. Because at RUFORUM, we are looking at how to ensure that we facilitate the network, which has really grown up to more than 160 universities across Africa in more than 40 African countries. So if we are going to have our data that might be useful to others stored in a way that cannot be accessible, or even thinking about whether or not to share these, this is something that is of great concern to us, because we think that with this collaboration, we want everybody to speak the same language, open in all ways. So this cuts across the institutions of research, whether the universities or research institutions. We really need to work towards aligning all our processes and our management, including the people who are involved in data acquisition, processing, and all steps of processes of data should be aligned towards open data. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for giving us a perspective from the library side, because we know that, like Omo mentioned, this regional and national research and education networks also emphasize so much on the ease of librarians coming together, because we know that it is true that you are the ones who spearhead this issue of data management, open data management. So how do we then drive the entire university system to be aligned towards open data management? So I think these are good questions that we have helped to let the audience do understand and to help boost this call that we are making, that everybody should move towards such data management. So just to say that this is an initiative that is continuing from what started way back. We've been in discussion with the LIBSENSE group, and to see that RUFORUM works with all partners to ensure that we build a platform that will be used by everyone within the continent. So in Harare, for example, we have developed a pilot survey, a tool that we are happy for Pamela to have spearheaded this. We did validate this in Harare, and then thereafter, the questions were modified and something that we think are now suitable to go out. And that's what I'm just about to do, to ensure that now we get to find out from the continent what are the kind of needs that we have as we move towards building a platform for open data science. So what you see on the screen is the link to the survey, which is available both in French and English, that we call upon everybody who is able to give us information that will guide us in the development of the open data science for Africa, to be able to give us quality information to aid. I think if all of you, both the presenters, discussants, and also those in the audience, please do share this link widely and to enable us get useful data to use. So I don't want to say so much, but to thank you that you have made good use of the 2 hours and that the struggle continues. So all I can say from RUFORUM and from LIBSENSE group, say thank you very much. I hereby declare that the webinar is closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.